Hey everybody, welcome to Culinary Characters Unlocked. I'm David Page. On this episode, the woman so many Americans rely on when they're trying to figure out where to go to dinner and what to order once they get there. She's the editor-in-chief of the online culinary powerhouse, Eater. Here's Stephanie Wu. Stephanie, hi, thanks for doing this.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
20 years ago, when Eater began, and happy anniversary, it is your 20th.
Thank you.
The most influential person in the American food world was the New York Times food critic. I would argue that today, the most influential person in the American food world is you.
We can agree to disagree, but thank you for the kind words.
Why disagree? I mean, what has more impact on the food habits of America and where we're leaning and the advice we're getting than Eater?
Gosh, I would say, listen, I will toot my team's horn all day long, but I think, and we can get into this so much more, but I think the really big thing we've seen over the past 20 years is just the democratization of almost every element of food, and that includes food media. Whereas there might once have been truly singular voices that could capture so much or the majority of so much attention, now there are voices coming from everywhere. Some voices have bigger platforms, some have smaller platforms, but I don't think that makes them any less influential, certainly in smaller circles or niche communities. And I think the beauty of food media today is the fact that you can get so many different voices. Most of them you can get in the palm of your hands, inside your AirPods. And there is that diversity of voices. That's what makes kind of covering the restaurant industry so special right now.
But it also means that when you want to decide what you want to eat and where you want to go and how you want to spend your food dollars, you're not sure who to trust. And so I would argue that Eater, at least, God, I hate to say this, in some respects is mainstream media in the food world.
I would agree with you. And I think that is a tough kind of mental thing to kind of think about, even though Eater's been around for 20 years, to really see it go from a very scrappy food blog covering New York City's restaurants to this much bigger network and this authority that we've built over 20 years, which we don't take granted for at any point. We really do hope that when anyone's looking for a restaurant recommendation, frankly, anywhere in the world, they're coming to Eater. They at least want to hear what we have to say, even if it may not be the only place that they're coming to for recommendations. We'd like to be the first.
What's your mission? What is Eater trying to do? I mean, I've said in the past that any kind of media makes a promise to its audience and then succeeds or fails based on whether or not it fulfills that promise. What promise are you making?
Yeah, I think at its core, we want to help you find your next great meal. That is an extremely simplified version of what we do, but at its core, that's our mission. What else does that mean? We don't just kind of provide recommendations without context. We have so much experience covering the cities that we're based in, and all of our recommendations come from the authority of somebody who lives in that community who can really weigh in on the impact that things are having locally, as well as zoom out for kind of a wider context. And also, we think food is community, food is culture, food is meaningful, and we want to make sure that wider awareness and context is brought to everything that we do.
How many cities do you have people in?
We are staffed in many cities across the U.S. We cover 23 cities across the Eater network, and that's a combination of editors on the ground and also trusted freelancers that we work very closely with. And then we've also got stringers in many, many global cities that we have ongoing relationships with that are giving us the best intel all the time.
So is this kind of like, it sounds like a dream job. Go to work for Eater or live in some city somewhere and go out to eat all the time on your dime, presumably. Literally, do you have people, you think about the Michelin inspectors, what do they do for a living? They go eat. You have people who make a living just basically eating every night?
I think that it's probably, while that is probably accurate in some way, I think there's a lot more that goes into what our editors and teams are doing on the ground in terms of the reporting, right? I think to an outsider, it might sound extremely fun, and it is extremely fun to be dining out and to be understanding the restaurant community. There's also a lot of coverage that happens that goes way beyond sitting down as an anonymous diner and going somewhere and writing something afterward. And I think a really great example happened at the beginning of this year with the Altadena fires in Los Angeles, and our team really springing into action to talk about and write about the ways that these fires were, of course, impacting LA at large, but the restaurant community as well. And we knew there were stories to be told. There's restaurant stories to be told every day, all the time, but that's our beat, that's our niche. And so we were really laser focused on figuring out, okay, what can Eater bring to the table in terms of our journalism, aside from a very basic, here's what's closed, here's what's open to help first responders, here's what's opening soon as communities reopen. There's also just bigger stories to be told about how these like larger things that happen in the world have an impact down to the restaurant level.
Well, maybe it's my own defensiveness, but I sometimes find myself defending the concept of journalism that covers food. I mean, I spent 7 million years running around the world as a network news producer, and what I do today, in my view, is no less journalistic. Are you seen as journalists? Is this seen as serious, important stuff, or is it seen as Basque cooking is in this year?
I would say that food coverage includes journalism. That is not the only thing under the wider umbrella of what we might consider food coverage or food media these days, much of which I think falls also under a more of an entertainment bucket, the same way that, food TV and shows like Top Chef are under that same umbrella. But I do think that what Eater does is it brings a journalistic bent to what we do. We have a very strong set of ethical standards. We have a policy when it comes to comped meals and gifts. And we take all of these parameters very seriously because we think it impacts the way we cover the world and it impacts the way that our readers come to us and what they trust. That being said, I don't think that one kind of portion of this coverage is any less important than another. I think we need the entertainment. I think journalists can often fall into the trap of being too self-serious and losing sight of the bigger picture of what audiences are looking for. And so I do think the bigger umbrella of what Eater does, because it's not just written work, we have mid-form videos, we have social videos, we have newsletters, we have so many things that we do. It runs the gamut of both entertainment and journalism, but we try to stay really clear to who we are at the core, which is the set of tenets that we kind of have agreed to as an industry.
Well, you, interestingly enough, came to the position I consider the most influential in American food, and you can dispute me as much as you want, not from the world of food. You haven't been to culinary school. Let's talk about how you got here. Were you born into a family of foodies? And I hate the word, but I use it.
I was not born into a family of foodies in any way, shape, or form. I will say that food has always been an important part of growing up. I think that's true in many Asian households where food is a shared language, food is a reason to come together. There was absolutely an emphasis on we're all coming together for meals regularly, not just with my immediate family, but with the extended family. And it's a time and a place to see everyone and to get together. But I would not say that as a child, my family was doing the kind of things that we're doing now, looking for lists of new restaurants and trying to tick them off and trying to visit places.
You grew up in a great food city, Taipei, in Taiwan.
That's right. I grew up in Taipei, potentially before it was considered a great food city in a global sense. But as somebody who's clearly very biased, I have always considered Taipei to be one of the greatest food cities in the world.
Why? What makes it so good?
Honestly, it is the diversity of what can be found. It is the accessibility of the price points. While fine dining was less of a thing, 20, 30 years ago when I was living there, it certainly was peaking in. There was no Michelin back then. It was all about the night markets. And I actually was thinking about this the other day, and I think that Taiwan is maybe one of the pioneers, what we call Asian metropolises. We're at the forefront of what we kind of call little treat culture now, which is essentially this idea that everybody deserves a little treat. What is a little treat? It's usually under $20. It's something you can grab and go. It doesn't require a reservation. It doesn't require anything overwrought. But the idea of night markets and the idea of being able to pop in to a stand who has been doing the same thing for decades and possibly only sells one thing and sells the absolute best version of that thing. And everybody who lives in the city has their idea of where they can find the best version of that thing. That to me is kind of the genesis of little treat culture and something that is still so true to this day about Taipei. And even before Michelin came in and even before there were fancy restaurants and these global kind of chefs that have made their mark there, there was a community of people who cared deeply about the very very specific food that they could find that cost very little that they possibly grew up eating. And you could find 10 different people in Taipei and ask them, where do you find the best scallion pancake stand? And they would give you 10 very different, very convincing answers.
And I bet all 10 of them are damn good.
And they're all great. And I think that is a core part of being in a global, fantastic food city that really brings people to want to visit from around the world.
So why'd you come to the States?
I know. Why did I leave, right? Now, I came to the States for college. As you were kind of alluding to earlier, I wanted to study journalism. This is something I was really interested in. I did want to spend some time in the US. I was born here, even though I moved back to Taipei at a very young age.
Let's be clear, your parents moved back to Taipei. It's not like you got on a plane at the age of 3.
I did get on a plane. I did not have much of a choice in the matter. I was barely walking at that point, I believe.
So you come to the States to pursue journalism.
Yes.
You went where? NYU?
I went to NYU. I had lofty dreams, I think as many of us did in the 2000s, of working for a print publication, which was kind of the gold standard at that time. And one of the reasons why I really fell for journalism is growing up in Taipei, we had access to what you might call Western or American popular culture. We had TV shows, we had the music and the albums, and we had the magazines. And I loved the magazines.
Which ones did you love? What were the magazines?
I was a 15-year-old girl reading Cosmo Girl and Teen Vogue and Entertainment Weekly and all of those kind of magazines that felt like they were a glimpse into American culture at a time when I wasn't living in the US. And I just loved the ability to connect across the world and see what was happening in other places in the world, even if I wasn't living there. And so I think I fell for, at its core, this idea that journalism, magazine journalism specifically for me, was a way to tell stories across borders where we could all be reading the same story, seeing the same thing, and for better or worse, right, when it comes to something like beauty trends or fashion trends. But there was this idea that you could get the information and it was the same thing somebody else was reading somewhere else in the world. I loved that the storytelling could be accessible to people everywhere, globally, around the world. And so I went into the world of journalism hoping to tell these stories and hoping to reach more people like me who maybe were a little bit less represented in mainstream media at the time.
We'll be right back. After NYU, you got into the American magazine business.
I did.
And you were quite successful. By 2024, named Editor of the Year by Adweek.
Yeah, I really was kind of like so laser focused on what can I do in this industry and how can I figure out where my niche is. And so my first job out of college was at a extremely august institution called Town and Country. It's a magazine that's been around for, I think, almost 200 years at this point. And I was completely 100% not in the target audience of this magazine as a young Asian American college grad. But I learned so much. I learned so much about what it meant to report and write for an audience that I wasn't a part of and really trying to embody what they would find interesting as a journalist. And the overlap that I found when trying to report on what these people might really care about and in different levels of society, the overlap that I found with my own interests was food and travel. And so that was interesting to me in terms of I could be working on a holiday gift guide where I found this incredible $20 piece of cheese that had won awards and could be shipped. And that was just as interesting and compelling to me as it was for the Town and Country audience. And so food and travel really became two things that I was growing my own interest in at that time and was finding that professionally there were just endless stories to tell. And so from there, I moved a little bit further into travel journalism, though I've always kind of dabbled back and forth in food and travel. They're just two areas that are really personally compelling to me as ways to see the world and ways to understand cultures that you may not have had any experience with yourself.
Well, did that experience reporting that and covering stories like, I mean, look, my food tastes and my interest in food were massively impacted by working internationally for several years. At what point did you look up and say, hey, you know, I'm really deeply into this food thing?
I don't know if I did. I think it was a fun thing that I thought I could always learn more about. And I think that's such an important part of being a journalist is you never assume you know everything. You're learning every day, no matter who you're talking to, no matter what you're writing about, what you're reporting on or researching. There was never a point where I thought, oh, I'm done learning about this industry. And I think that was part of why I continue to be endlessly fascinated with the work that I do.
What are you getting more deeply? I mean, you lived in New York, which is one of the great food cities in the world. Was food playing an important part in your life? Was it playing an increasingly important part of your life?
Absolutely. And I think that I did not really make this connection. This is not something I would have been able to verbalize when I had just moved to New York. I'll put it that way. But one thing I recognized extremely early on after moving to the US, moving to New York for college, is that I immediately was homesick for Taiwanese food, for Chinese food more broadly. And I was living in New York City, one of the greatest, again, another one of the greatest food cities in the world, where purportedly you can find just about any version of many, many, many cuisines. And I had to do the work for myself of, okay, I'm a college student, I don't have that much to spend, but I would love to find some really good Chinese food that can remind me of home. And this was before New York had this proliferation of incredible Taiwanese restaurants in Manhattan.
So Mott Street wasn't doing it for you, huh?
It wasn't the same. I think that anyone who grows up eating something very specific would tell you they're chasing something very specific. And it was less so the fantastic dim sum parlors, which I ate growing up, but was not kind of hitting that homesick nostalgia note for me. And going out to Flushing, as much as I would have loved to do that constantly, wasn't practical. And so,
but that mall there, that food court, what is it?
The New World Mall in Flushing, yes.
That's incredible.
It's incredible. But as a college student, I wasn't quite at the point of, let me hop on a train for 30 minutes every weekend. I was looking for something close by. I was looking for something that could scratch that itch and I could introduce to my friends and say, hey, this is why this reminds me of home.
Could you find it eventually?
I wouldn't say I found it in a specific restaurant, but I will say it broadened my eyes to how to find that. And what I did find was that the tastes of home that were the most reminiscent to me without being specifically Taiwanese food were Sichuan food. And that those flavors of the spiciness and the boldness and the way that, so much of the cooking was high heat and charred, that had enough elements and I could find enough Sichuan restaurants in Manhattan for it to replicate the same thing. And so for a long time, for many years, probably even now, when I'm just looking for takeout that is kind of close to home cooking without being home cooking, those are the types of restaurants that I gravitate to. But it was this thinking and this working through of the process that helped me understand Chinese food is not Chinese food is not Chinese food when you're not in China, not in the US either, obviously. And so understanding the regional differences, understanding how those regional differences have been marketed in a foreign country, and then doing the research to find what you could subjectively call the best version. That was so fun to me. I wanted to do more of that.
Well, that's what you supervise now.
Yeah, that was research I loved just on my own, and as research I continue to really push the team to do, because I think there's that innate drive to find the best recommendation or the best version of something and share with an audience why you think that's the best.
That opens a door to a fascinating debate. You'll go to a Chinese restaurant and some guy who maybe took a trip to China once or maybe not will declare that what you're eating is not authentic. And yes, it's not authentic food as eaten in China, but it's certainly authentic Chinese American food, a cuisine of its own. Isn't that a valid cuisine?
Yeah. And I think this, much like fusion, authenticity has just been this buzzword that's been overtaken by this idea of expectations and what one person's expectations are versus another expectations are, when the reality is everybody's expectations are based so much in their own personal background. And so I think to some extent we've moved a little bit past authenticity. Or I guess I should say the restaurants that excite me are less concerned with authenticity and more so focused on the personal. And so somebody's story could very much include both Taiwanese influences, but also Taiwanese American influences and maybe influences from another place. And it's the way they bring that together in a restaurant menu and the way they tell their story that is so exciting. And I don't think that this chase for authenticity is as big of a goal for many chefs as it maybe once was, when you felt like you had to be the one Georgian restaurant representing all of Georgia in a country very far away from Georgia.
Having been there and eaten there, it's a damn good cuisine. You're fascinating to talk to, so we've kind of taken a left. I want to get back to your career path for just a minute. How'd you get to eat her?
For a long time, my career centered around the worlds of food and travel, and I love both, and I was happy kind of bouncing between both. And I will also say I have been an eater Eater reader since maybe day one, very, very, very early on.
As a child.
As a child, 20 years ago, I loved Eater. It's always been a resource for me. I loved seeing what the teams were writing about. I loved traveling and looking for their recommendations. So it's always had this aura of kind of interest for me, a place that I was interested in, but never really understood the inner workings of it. So how did I get to Eater? I was at my previous job. I was at Condé Nast Traveler before Eater. So all things travel, of course, food is part of the remit when it comes to travel coverage, but it was very much travel focused, and the pandemic hit. Nobody was traveling. And the same way that the pandemic really kind of changed the fabric of the travel industry, the pandemic changed the fabric of the restaurant industry.
How?
In every way possible. I think it forced us to rethink as diners our relationship with restaurants and what they meant to us when we could not go to them any longer. And I think as restaurant operators and chefs and anyone in the industry, it forced them to take a look at their books and say, how do we survive? What do we do? It's very brass tacks. What are we? Do we do takeout and no contact dining, outdoor dining? Like all of these things just shifted what it meant that the requirements to have a restaurant and made us rethink all of those things. I really saw a lot of parallels between the travel industry and the restaurant industry at this crucial time of 2021, 2022. And when the opportunity at Eater came up, it just was not something I could pass up to work at a publication I've respected for so long while covering this industry at what I would argue was an absolute crux for the way that we were thinking about restaurants and food.
And how has the culinary landscape been altered by the pandemic? We're now several years in, and every chef I talk to, we're still talking about the impact of the pandemic. So in your view, what's happened?
Like I said, so much has changed. But one really big change that I've seen is just this willingness to talk about the business of running a restaurant.
You mean as restaurants go out of business left and right?
And to figure out, like, how do we do this more sustainably? And the way that I think operators have just been a lot more transparent about, hey, we're cutting back hours because of, the staffing isn't there, or we're switching the menu around because we can't afford certain ingredients because of the threat of tariffs, right? So much has changed, but the transparency around why these decisions are being made, I think for the fervent restaurant goer, which I absolutely do include myself in, it just makes it so much more interesting to engage with what these business owners are trying to do. And yes, you get a fantastic meal at many, many places you go, but I think it's about just being a little bit more ingratiated in the community. And you do that when you understand a little bit more of the point of view of what the restaurant owners, what the chefs, what the servers, what everybody who works at that restaurant is facing as kind of like a work challenge.
Well, the challenges are immense at the moment, are they not?
They've always been immense, but I would say that we're in a point where those challenges are transparent and we're much more willing to talk about it, which I think is a big difference and an important one. It's not like a hidden secret, like how these things get operated and where the money comes from and how we run these beloved restaurants.
Back in a moment. The reality is the cost of everything has gone up.
Absolutely.
And in places like New York, the cost of real estate's insane, which is a huge reason restaurants are failing.
Yes.
Is fine dining dead?
I don't think that fine dining is dead, or I would go as far as to say, I don't think that it will ever die, but I do think the idea of fine dining has shifted greatly. And you could argue, oh, okay, there's no white tablecloth. Is it still fine dining? If there's no set menu, is it fine dining? There are so many kind of factors to what we once might have said, this is the Michelin inspector's checklist of 3 stars. And if you're not getting these things right, you're not considered fine dining. But I think that fine dining is changing in a way that has just become much more fun and interesting. Maybe let's say 20 years ago, fine dining was this very prescribed. It had to be French. It had to be in a very fancy building in New York City, perhaps at Columbus Circle. And then maybe 5 or 10 years later, you had the shift toward, okay, fine dining can mean a lot of things. It can mean omakase. It can mean really sumptuous Chinese banquets. It can mean like large format meals. You have kind of the whole momofuku and the bosom and these different types of dining experiences coming together to really paint a broader picture of fine dining. And I think now we've shifted even further where, like I was saying, it doesn't need to be tablecloths and stuffiness and very dressed up servers. Fine dining is found at restaurants in Philadelphia where there's an Afrocentric menu and there's African art on the walls and just like fascinating storytelling.
I'm not that far from Philly. Which restaurant are you talking about?
I'm talking about Honeysuckle, which I visited recently. And
I haven't been.
absolutely loved. They used to be a smaller shop called Honeysuckle Provisions, a deli that focused on sandwiches and pastries, and they closed that down and they opened a larger space closer to downtown Philly, I think at the beginning of this year, and now they have full service dinner. They've gotten a fantastic brunch service, and it's just an evolution of the way that these operators, Sybil and Omar, are telling their story.
Well, it's interesting. I was in Charleston last week and we went to Vern's. We had booked a reservation before they got their Michelin star. And I literally, in the middle of one of the finest meals I've ever had, stunning restaurant. And the husband and wife that own it, the Heinzes, are going to be on the podcast. I mentioned to my wife, looking at the table, I said, it's a Michelin restaurant. The food's incredible. It's got 1 star. Look at the table. No tablecloth. So yes, the definition keeps changing, but that also gets me to another place. I had another meal at a place that's Michelin recommended and was deeply disappointed. It also is on the New York Times 50 best list. So either I got them on a bad night or things are not what I'd like them to be. These accolades, these stars, these awards, who gives a damn? Should it matter? Does it matter?
I think it does matter. And I think it matters because with most types of art form, and you could say that cooking is an art form, there is an importance to that external validation, right? And it opens up opportunities. Nobody can deny that, right? Like being able to say, I'm Beard nominated or I've won a Beard or I've got, however many stars from Michelin.
Well, in today's economic environment, it may keep you alive.
Absolutely. And it's yet another factor in the way that restaurants can stand out. And I would say earlier we talked about it's never been harder to open up a restaurant. There's also never been this many restaurants. There are so many restaurants. The decision fatigue is so real and there are so many options every single day for every single meal. And I do think that is why we turn to outlets like Eater. We turn to outlets like the New York Times to cut through the noise and say, okay, somebody that I trust has been there and this was their experience. And I may go or you may go and have your own experience. And that's absolutely valid because I think we often forget that it's not just about the food. It's about so much more than the food. It's about the server. It's about the conversation. It's about who you're dining with. That's not something that the restaurant has any control over. It's about the ingredients on any given night, how the kitchen's working together. And all of those things come together in a restaurant experience. And that can never be replicated. I could never replicate the experience of a New York Times critic or your experience or anything like that. And that is kind of the joy of you can read somebody's opinion, you can have great points of view and great recommendations, but you also form your own. And that's kind of the heartbeat of what keeps the recommendations engine going is the word of mouth when you talk about it to your friends and you say, I loved it because XYZ. And we should have more different reasons why people like things. I think it's easy to fall into the trap of, okay, everybody orders the same 3 dishes at the restaurant because it's been coined as the must order dishes. And then it's just a very copy and paste experience when the menu wasn't designed to do that. And so having a choose your own adventure at a restaurant is something that I very much encourage.
That brings us to the Eater 38, which is as important an award as any of the others in many respects. Why 38 and how did this happen?
I have asked this question many times. I believe that it was a completely arbitrary number that was chosen, but we stuck to it.
And it preceded you, right?
It preceded me. I think it dates back to very, very early days at Eater. But I think at the core, the team was looking to have to limit itself, to force a limit on how big can this list be.
Yeah, because 39 would have been just way too much.
Or 41, who knows, right?
Oh, no, you can't go there.
Some of the best journalism happens when you give yourself parameters and you have to work inside box. And so assigning the number 38 is just one way that we've created a box and hopefully a name that is recognizable and people know okay, we're on the Eater 38.
So how do you get picked? Can you lobby? I mean, if I own a restaurant, can I call you or write you and say, you really got to look at my joint?
People do. And many people do. We've got email addresses for every city site and people often, write and say, hey, check this place out, whether that's a restaurant owner doing it or whether it's a diner doing it.
And do you?
We certainly, people read everything and they'll do their best to get to any place that has come highly recommended. And of course, restaurants have publicists and publicists know how to reach editors and we field many press releases a day too. But we find it really, really important at Eater that we're not just sticking to the places that have put money toward this marketing and the press push of it all, that we're also looking for reader tips. And we're also just online. We're in the Reddit forums. We're reading local papers. We're trying to see and understand all the places that are opening. We're trying to get there as soon as we feel is fair, right? Because sometimes you don't want to go in the first few weeks. Sometimes you want to wait a little bit and really let the restaurant hit its groove. And we're making these judgment calls day in, day out. What's exciting? What's actually good? Because exciting and good may not be the same thing. And what makes it worthy of a place on our list when best is subjective and we are considering everything from price diversity to geographic diversity to cuisine diversity when we put these lists together. Because as much as I love Japanese food and sushi, a list of 38 sushi spots is just not as interesting.
What's hot right now? What's the trend, or what are the trends? I mean, I read recently, well, not that recently, I guess, a declaration in the past year that the fine dining that's happening in New York has gone heavily Korean.
Yes.
Give me some trends. You guys have the pulse of our culinary nation. What do you got?
Yeah. So we just published our list of the best new restaurants in America. It's 15 restaurants. We're extremely excited about the cohort that we've put together and all the exciting things that they're doing. But one of the trends that we pulled out that I find is really interesting is the unrelenting interest in bakeries, particularly bakeries that feel extremely personal. This is not one of the bakeries we listed because it's not new, but there's a fantastic bakery in New York's Lower East Side called Bon by Lauren. This is a pastry chef who used to work at Gramercy Tavern. She's got French training, she's Vietnamese, and she brings her French techniques and her Vietnamese flavors together in a bakery. And it just feels to me like the type of bakery that you could not find in many other places in the world doing things that you cannot taste.
Like what?
She does this fantastic pandan coconut chiffon cake that I adore. It's probably one of my absolute favorite desserts in the city. She does this morning glory and scallion scone. It's just it's interesting flavors that have personal meaning to her. And it's a bakery that she funded on Kickstarter. And there's just so much interesting storytelling there and how personal it is. And we've seen that replicated with Filipino spots in Chicago and other places around the country.
Okay, so bakeries. What else is hot? Just between you and me.
The other big trend we've identified is what we're calling the rise of the third place. And so that's, again, not a new concept by any means. Starbucks has, kind of positioned itself as a third place for a long time.
Well, they're trying to reposition themselves.
Yeah. And you could argue that trends maybe jump the shark when a big company like Starbucks gets in on it. But we've just noticed this year, particularly, a spate of places that aren't quite restaurants, but they're not quite anything else. Seeing this creativity, I guess, of finding a space, really wanting it to be a place where people can gather. It doesn't even mean you need a full kitchen or I don't know what the actual inner workings are looking like. But I think it's an interesting question to say, like, can you have a restaurant without gas? Like, what do you need? Do you just need to be a place where people can gather, have some bites, have some drinks, and get together? Like, it's really kind of like forcing us to interrogate our definition of what it means to be a restaurant and what we're looking for out of a restaurant experience. And I really think that will continue. A restaurant could be a plastic stool on the side of a sidewalk. Could it be a food truck? These are questions that we ask ourselves as a team every day. And so I think it's interesting to further extend that conversation and ask diners and people in the industry to also grapple with this idea of what is a restaurant.
Regulation gets in the way of some of this creativity. I mean, for the longest time, it was hell to try to put a food truck on the street in LA. I assume in many cities, if you decided to put some plastic chairs out on the sidewalk and declare it an eating space, you'd be in all sorts of bureaucratic trouble.
Absolutely.
Is there too much damn red tape constricting the food industry in a time of economic challenge?
There are so many challenges. Red tape, certainly one of them. I think you could find any new restaurant operator, or even not new restaurant operator, you could find any restaurant operator and they could, in New York City, talk to you for hours and hours about how long it takes to get the gas up and running. And so this has been kind of an evergreen issue with like what it takes to open a restaurant and how hard it is. And I don't know that I see that changing anytime soon, but I do think the conversation around it is really helping take down the barriers. You see restaurant owners telling other restaurant openers, this is what I went through. This is how I navigated it. And that passing of the advice has been so important. A few years ago at Eater, we launched a industry newsletter called Pre-Shift, really meant to target exactly that. Be a place for owners and operators to share information, talk among themselves, talk about what's on their mind, and make sure that it doesn't feel like this crucial information, as much as it should be out there, to make sure we're not gatekeeping it so that it helps new restaurant owners figure out and build upon all of the challenges that others have already been through from a red tape point of view, but also from many, many, many other points of view.
Are we eating any better as a country? And by the way, not to get political, but this whole SNAP thing should scare the hell out of us with respect to how many Americans have a hard time eating.
Absolutely. I think these days it is so hard to say any question followed by as a country. There's just such a divide, even in New York City, because I'll speak to like what I see. It is such a divide between those who obviously are struggling to think about where food is coming from every day and whether their SNAP benefits are going to be fulfilled, to those whose main concern around dining is, okay, I've got some client entertaining to do and I need a fantastic place to go, right? So I think that it's hard to make any broad sweeping assumptions in that way. But I guess if I focus a little bit more on who I think the core Eater audience member is, the group of people we speak to most frequently in terms of they're very interested in restaurants and the evolution of the industry, and they dine out frequently and they consider themselves in the know about what's going on in any given city at any time, then I would say yes, we are absolutely eating better because we've got so much more choice.
But you don't think, I mean, look, people give lip service to I can eat vegetables. The steakhouses are not going out of business. I mean, how much of this is real and how much of it is just lip flap?
I guess I should caveat, not a doctor, but I feel like from a actual health point of view, that is a choice that people are obviously making every day. And do you balance out your restaurant meals with something at home or something easier and lighter? Hopefully everything in moderation. And that's the way I prefer to eat. But for those who want to, absolutely, you could be dining out at a different restaurant every single night and you could find lighter fare. You'll find vegetables on any menu. But to your point, we're not shying away from the steakhouse. We're not shying away from the fast food even. We're not shying away from foie gras and heavy things that really mark this idea of excess and the availability of tapping into excess through what you eat.
What changes have you tracked in the way we dine during your time at Eater, and what do you predict?
The biggest change we're seeing now, which I think we're definitely grappling with in terms of how this gets covered and talked about further, but the biggest change we're seeing now is the shrinking of portion sizes. And I do think this is a direct result of the increase in GLP-1 drugs. And so we've seen chefs and restaurants come out and say like, hey, we're introducing smaller portions. This is in fact one way that is going to help us tackle food costs, because if we serve smaller portions and we charge a little less, we're still going to make money and there's less food waste, right? There's a lot of considerations that go into any type of menu strategizing for a restaurant, but we're definitely seeing that as something that people are speaking to. And I think it's partially marketing to those who may want smaller portions. And I think it also goes to what we've been talking about, which is just more conversation, more transparency over, hey, here's why we're doing this.
What do you see coming down the pike? I mean, okay, so Korean food is having a moment. What's next?
I think it goes back to what I was saying about the bakeries and what I was saying about authenticity, which is that I want to see more emphasis on the personal, more emphasis on the storytelling. It used to be that you would find restaurants that were trying to cater to so many interests at the same time. I remember living for a brief amount of time in Boston, and you would see restaurants that had Chinese food and Japanese food and Korean food and Thai food all on the same menu. And it was this idea that you had to cater to every taste in order to survive, which absolutely may have been true back then. But I think what's more interesting to me now, and what I hope is interesting to our audience and to your audience and people who are paying attention, is this idea of we don't have to speak to everyone. We just want to show a little bit of what we're doing, and we're hoping to be able to tell that story to others. Can a restaurant survive off the economics of that? That's obviously a lot harder if you're not serving the steak frites and you're not serving the roast chicken and the things that people have so connected to. Like, that's the one thing that's going to keep your restaurant going. But my hope, and I don't know if this is a prediction as much as it is a plea, my hope is that more of the economics and the people who work in this industry that are driving kind of the business decisions see the value in these types of investments and these types of storytelling, so that we have just a more interesting restaurant industry and more interesting restaurant landscape for many more years to come.
You see any structural changes coming down? I mean, the no tipping thing was tried and it kind of failed. There's a push for higher pay, which will lead to higher prices. What do you think structurally is going to happen to the business?
Honestly, I don't know. When I think about what could happen, are we past this current threat of tariffs? I hope so. Does that mean that might not come back? I'm not sure. But structurally, as pricing goes up, I think, again, every part of running a restaurant that you imagine has to change. And I think it leads to, let's say, ingredients costs go up, staff costs go up, everything goes up, your menu costs go up. Then that leads diners to have to make a choice, right? Can I afford this? How often will I continue to go out? Will I go from dining out twice a week to just once a week? How much harder does it make for me to make every decision? And so I think that coupled with the small attention culture that we're in right now makes it harder than ever for restaurants to not just capture someone's attention, but to get them to come back. So structurally, first of all, harder to get people in the doors. So you have to be more creative about getting people in the doors. And then secondly, get them to come back. And that's something I think about a lot as somebody who is dining out and always trying to try new things. It's very rare for me to get to go back to a restaurant a second time, a third time, and to build that idea of being a regular and having that deeper connection with a restaurant.
But there's nothing better than being a regular.
There's nothing better. And so I think that is, to me, structurally what I'd like to see from both a diner and a restaurant point of view is like, how do you continue to remember that being a regular is great? You don't always have to chase what's new, what's different. How do restaurants continue to compel people to become regulars? And how do diners change their dining habits to become regulars at a few more places?
I read a quote. You were interviewed talking about everyone's always asking you where to eat in a city. And you said, I don't want to be sending you to where I eat because where I eat isn't necessarily that exciting. Explain that.
Yeah, there's a theory that I do subscribe to that best actually means best that is also accessible, as in you can get in quite frequently and that you can get there from wherever you are geographically. So when you ask me best, I'm usually telling you, okay, this is a place I really, really love. It also happens to be within 20 minutes of where I live, and I don't have to be online at midnight 3 weeks before waiting for a reservation. And so it's usually that combination of factors that's going to be my recommendation. And that I think is true of somebody who lives in Brooklyn, somebody who lives in Queens. We all are we love our little, what's that phrase? I think it's 10-minute city or 15-minute city that is very popular. And so that's how I make my recommendations personally. But I also have to think about professionally, I think about the readership, right? I think about people who are traveling from very, very far places to come to New York. I think about people who just want to have a sense of what it means to try Korean fine dining in New York and how that's different from Korean fine dining elsewhere. And so that's when my recommendations start to shift. But I do think, like I said earlier, I could give you 10 different recommendations. They'd all be good. Someone else can give you 10 different recommendations. They'd probably all be good, but everyone is just looking for that one simple answer, and that's a lot harder to get.
Do you cook?
I am not a cook.
Do you eat at home?
I do eat at home. I am very lucky to have a partner who enjoys cooking and does the majority of the cooking for the family.
When people are looking for a restaurant experience, you got any advice for them? I mean, aside from pick up the Eater 38 and choose one of those.
Let's take this from a traveler's point of view. When I travel, I am always looking to have an experience that I cannot have at home. I live in a city where I can have many, many, many different experiences. And so, for example, I was most recently in Vegas. I was looking for a very much Vegas experience because typically when you go to Vegas, people are go to Carbone, go to the New Coat. And I'm I have all those restaurants in New York. I don't need to, as much as I love those restaurants, I don't need to go fly across the country and have another version of those restaurants. And so I went with an experience that was a little bit more out of my comfort zone. It was very much more theater oriented. It's called Super Frico. It's in the Cosmopolitan. The food was wonderful. The theater of it all was probably not exactly what I would want out of a typical everyday dinner experience at home, but it was very Vegas and it served that need. And so when I think about when people are saying, I want a restaurant experience, it's what exactly do you want out of this experience that perhaps you cannot replicate somewhere else? And how does it speak to the culture or the community of the destination that you're in? Because if the experience you want is, fast food, then if you're looking for a McDonald's, yes, you can find that in many different places around the world.
But you also raise the issue here of, to me, when I go someplace, I want to eat something that's from that place, not because the local seasonal thing is hip, but because it's probably best there. You can now get pretty much any regional cuisine any place else. You can get Texas barbecue in North Carolina. Somehow that troubles me. Shouldn't there be something you can only get there?
I see your point. I also think that I guess like to take it back to what I was saying earlier, I would have been so sad at 18 if I'd moved to a place and I couldn't find any Chinese food there whatsoever.
Okay.
And so I do think there's these communities who are homesick or nostalgic who want something, and even better if that thing that is mostly created to serve that community can then serve that wider community of that city or a traveler looking to have a little glimpse of it.
Tell me about Eater Under Wraps, since it's just a few days away.
Sure. We've got this big fun shopping experience called Eater Under Wraps. It's going to be in Soho. It's a 2-day event. I like to think about it as our gift guides come to life, and gift guides are something we spend a lot of time thinking about. We work on it months and months in advance. And this year, it's really a chance to kind of immerse yourself in what we're calling a holiday house. The experience of walking through a home, a very nice home where you want to shop everything and you're getting inspired for what you might be purchasing for friends and family. But I think the most fun part is going to be the demos that we're going to do, the cocktail lounge experiences. We're bringing some of our favorite bars and bakers and other people into the space so that it can really feel like a place that you want to hang out in all day and really kind of get in the holiday spirit through food and drink, but also a little bit of shopping. It's a one-stop shop.
Okay, final question. What's your death row meal?
Gonna have to go back to Taiwanese food.
Scallion pancakes, huh?
That might be a little heavy for death row. I don't know. Since we're in a dream state, my death row meal is going to be something that is very specific to a dish that my grandma used to cook for us. Used to cook in that we ask her not to be in the kitchen anymore, even though she absolutely would do it if we let her. It is mustard greens, pork, stir-fried together with a noodle soup.
Stephanie, it's been an absolute delight chatting with you. I can't thank you enough for taking the time to do this.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for the kind words about Eater, and hope you continue to follow and love all the things we do.
Stephanie Wu on Culinary Characters Unlocked. I'm David Page. I'll see you next time, and be sure to check out our Culinary Characters Unlocked Substack.